Independent School District Workshop Meeting. Today is Monday, November 14th, 2022, and the time is 5:34. At this time, if you can join me with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. There's no public comment. Item number 4, strategic plan and development process with our partners. Mo Casey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President and Dr. Carmen, trustees. Again, Greg Gibson with Moat Casey and my El Paso travel guide, Dr. Jody Duran, who always makes sure that I eat at only the best places when I'm here and finds the best places, shortcuts and everything else. It's good to have her knowing the territory. And then Dr. Duran joined Dr. Carmen and I with the cabinet meeting this afternoon for, I think we were around 3 hours and 15 minutes or so with some real heavy thinking. And I think Dr. Carmen just let them go. And which was a good thing, because it was just, you can usually tell after the first hour when they start into the carbs and the snacks that we know that we're moving up to cognitive dissonance. But it was a really good afternoon. So actually, Mr. President, I would like to start with a debrief, and you have a hard copy of this, I think, in your packet, but I'm going to put it on the screen behind. And so just in way of managing everybody's expectations for tonight, I view your Team of 8 credit and your Senate Bill 1566 credit kind of like in your work in aggregate of all the meetings and the times that we've been together. So, I mean, you're going to get, tonight will culminate your 3 hours of credit for those two, if that makes sense. If we're, I think a couple hours, you know, maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours, somewhere in there, I'll check in with you, because that combined with all the previous, you know, we're hitting your 3 hours. So I don't, this isn't like a hold you, you know, to the time clock tonight. There's also quite a bit of reading materials for you to think and reflect on, lining up with all of our previous conversations and then tonight's conversation. The purpose of tonight is to talk about the district strategic plan expressed in a balanced scorecard. That's what's behind me. And if you all, and then we're going to really kind of pull apart the board's role, the superintendent's role, cabinet's role, and then how do we do this dance in harmony. So the board's role by statute is the oversight of management. Dr. Carmen actually supervises management. If you want to look at it that way, different. The board's role is the oversight of management. What Dr. Carmen wishes to do, that we completely support, is build a mechanism where you can still be a board member, but you get an update on what's going on to the level that it really satisfies your intellectual curiosity, just like your moral compass for what are we trying to get accomplished in Socorro ISD. All right, fair enough. And today, by the way, I feel pretty good, because about a month and a half ago, there was nothing on this document that's on your screen except Socorro ISD strategic plan. And if you all remember, there were a bunch of pieces of poster paper like strung all the way. So all that poster paper, when the community was in here, is in the gray box up at the top. It's your beliefs, your mission, and your vision. So Dr. Carmen, what I thought about today, and we're not necessarily doing this right now, but part of the follow-up work, if you will, for the trustees is to really read through the belief, the mission, and the vision that you all were in the room when all that was written. You know, now we've had a few hours to back away from it, like read it like you're reading it for the first time, and let Dr. Carmen know if you see something that's in wording. And again, I'm not saying right now, I'm just kind of teeing up some homework for you to just really spend some time. We've looked at it and re-looked at it and talked about it, and I think we're in that point now where the last time Dr. Duran and I made a change, we changed it back to where we were before, right? Because we've made so many loops on it. So I think it's close, if not ready to go. So again, tonight, just want some just want to make sure that you all feel comfortable with the belief, the mission, and the vision. Now, what's different, I'm going to move this just a little bit so that I can use this pointer and look at what you're looking at. But when we first talked, we talked about the fact that your strategic plan will overlap with 4 different areas, and the simple version is just student, staff, community, and finance. So in the scorecard that you have there, you have all 4 of those. Now, what's new is that the senior leader team, or your cabinet, and Dr. Duran and I have been working on, what are we trying to accomplish with priority 1? And tonight is just a draft that we are presenting to the board for a value add. So if you see something that doesn't sound about right or whatever, the next 30 days is your time to give some feedback. So we're saying students grow and support. Your priority 1 is students, and then the priority is grow and support each student with robust opportunities. So inside that, we're looking at 3 strategic objectives. So 1.1, improve academic achievement for all students. 1.2, all students are college and/or career and/or military ready. And then 1.3, we want well-rounded students. Now, Dr. Carmen, we fell short of time today. We're going to work on that being maybe not a sentence, but at least a clause. Like, that's just a placeholder. And I think y'all get the idea. Like, it's not the academic thing, and it's not the college, career, military, but it's like the rest of the child. What is the stuff on the rest of the child? And you'll see some blank spaces. And again, today was a 3-hour and 15-minute push for this. Actually, the staff had already worked on a lot of this. It was a robust conversation about this stuff. Now, what, Dr. Carmen, my observation today was there was no disagreement on like the big rocks of what we were trying to accomplish. But at one point, I just remember we said, well, what's the number? And someone said 62, and someone else said 68, and someone else said 82, and someone else said 83, and Dr. Duran was looking at the computer, and she said it's 78. So my point with that is we all thought that the number we were giving that goes out here was the right number. What the clarity that comes with this is that once we put this on here and we start regular communications with the board, we never fumble with that number again. And the board never fumble. And I don't mean fumble, I just mean like we're completely calibrated. We know when we are talking about 1.1, this is how we measure it at the end. And so I don't know, that was fun to me. It was intellectually stimulating, and it was just fun to watch that cabinet calibrate. And of course, we're not on camera, and so everybody's got jackets off and sleeves up, and we're like, wait a minute, that's not right. And it was just fun just to watch that discussion and robust, debate about what are we really trying to accomplish. So the work that the cabinet's going to do over the next few weeks before December the 13th, we hope to have a draft back to the board potentially for approval, Dr. Carmen, on December the 13th. But I want to be clear about one thing right now that's really, really important for the board. The board is only, well, I hate to say only, but because it's not really a limitation, it's just the way I believe it should be. But the board adopts the belief, the mission, the value, and the first 2 columns. You adopt the strategic objectives. This, and let me go ahead and show you all of them. There's 3 more that are in your staff priority: recruit high quality talent, capacity building for our staff at all levels, and employee satisfaction. And then priority 3, your community, serve and market to our community through communication, collaboration, and engagement. 3 strategic objectives, 1 related to parent students, 1 related to the community at large, and 1 specifically related to marketing. And then priority 4, which is transparent and efficient processes to ensure equitable distribution of district resources. We have facility, equity of funding, and long-range financial planning. So you have 4 priorities and 3 objectives in each priority for a total of 12 strategic objectives. The board is adopting the 12 strategic objectives. Then what the staff is going to do is work on what I kept calling columns 3, 4, and 5 today. So if you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they're going to round out columns 3 and 4, which is what are the 3 most important things that we do to move the needle on that objective. So if we have 12 objectives, 3 key strategic actions per objective, then now the superintendent is directing, for lack of a better term, 36 key strategic actions. So if you want to look at it that way. So any given day or night, Dr. Carmen, is maybe spending his day at his desk wondering, what did I do today? Did I do anything today? And I found myself just sitting with the scorecard, like, where are we? Oh yeah, tomorrow we have a meeting on 3.2. Okay, so I'm gonna read a little bit about 3.2. Does that make sense? So like it helps him know that you have directed him basically to direct others to deliver on these 36 key strategic actions. You're the driver of your district improvement plan, your board or your superintendent goals set for his appraisal, we believe can perfectly align to that. The only thing that might be addition to this is board superintendent relations. If you add that as a 5th piece, then these other 36 things are the things that we want the superintendent to get done, plus those 5 or 6. I think you can use the ones from TASB plenty fine. They have a board superintendent relations component. You can lay out their 7 domains anytime you want to against this, and you've got it covered, and then some. I've already done it because you asked the question about superintendent appraisal, and I wanted to calibrate it. So you can, this becomes the driver of all the work. Now, to that end, the superintendent, over time, and we're going to talk about this maybe at a later date, it's not the purpose of tonight, but to build a reporting mechanism for the trustees to get an update on this stuff. Even though the board does not adopt it, I believe, or we believe, that the board has a right to hear how that's going. You have a question, Ms. Nair?
I do. If we align the superintendent's evaluation with these strategic objectives, then do we use like the long-term measures to support the through his evaluation?
Great question. I think the answer to that is eventually less. Now, yes, today we talked about a lot of this is getting the work lined up for at least 12 or 14 months, if that makes sense. So he may initially have to give you what I would call like significant outcomes on how we're moving. But then eventually, I know your intention, Dr. Carmen, is like those progress measures are our measures to check in on how we're doing. We spent a lot of time picking those things around today, and we added some progress measures on here and took some things off that don't really move the needle as much as other ones. So the short answer is yes, eventually.
Eventually. Okay, thank you.
But initially, you may need at least this cycle if y'all do January. What's your appraisal cycle?
Higher date March.
Okay, so like at least one of those, maybe 2 of those, and then to get it.
Because we haven't even approved it yet.
That's right, get it up in the air. Then if I know Dr. Carmen, he'll start bringing those measures in more and more and more, and probably saying less about all the work they're doing and just like, here's the needle we're moving, here's the needle we're moving, here's the needle we're moving. Here's one we're not, and we're going to work more, we're going to work more on that. Great question, and thank you for clarifying that. Dr. Duran, cover the bases, you think, with the scorecard? Anything else you can think of, Dr. Carmen? I don't want to just, I I can nerd out on scorecards all day long. I don't.
You might just point out what they have in their hands.
Thank you.
As it pertains
Yeah, it's
to-
back at the back. So thank you, Dr. Carmen. So we just dug in, like, okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? We all of a sudden we had the pulling numbers and data, and so what Dr. Carmen designed, which I really like a lot. So it's almost like an explanatory note that will hyperlink back to those outcome measures, if that makes sense. So we'll build out these charts, and we could even have a key for what these different words mean and things like that. But it'll provide some clarity on how we're getting this stuff right here. Like those charts will be linked to these key outcomes so that if someone's interested, they can go over there and they can pull that data. And we'll put the source citation and all that. It's just if you put all that stuff on the scorecard, you jam up the scorecard with so much data that it's hard, to make sense of it. But I love. We were just working on words, and then all of a sudden this screen popped up this chart popped on the screen, and it's like, okay, wait, words are over. We're gonna work on data for a while. Yes, Dr. Duran, did you have something? Okay, so.
Requires specific to third grade math.
Dr. Duran.
Sorry for the people that are watching.
Thousands at home.
So this data that you all are seeing is what is required by the state for third grade. It's House Bill 3 requirements for reading, math, and CCMR. So we really spent a lot of time with this data and calibrating, where do we need to be in 5 years to show progress to get us where we want to be academically as a district.
I think the overarching consensus today was to make sure all of that was integrated into that so that you all don't feel like, oh, let's set the district goals aside for a while and let's meet some requirement. It's embedded. We're trying to bake those requirements into the cake. But the difference is we're not trying to only do what the state says you have to minimally do. We've exceeded that to just what did our community say in the SWOT they wanted. We kept looking back at, shocker, we kept looking back at the community SWOT analysis today, trying to make sure that we were lining up this work with what the community said they desired in our work in this room with the poster paper all across the room. I mean, to me, that's really cool that someone said, wait, pull out the SWOT. What did they say? And then we're trying to line up an objective, to what the community said. I don't know. I think we talked today about, what's enough, what's too much. I think, Dr. Carmen, you're really close to having kind of just the right amount. It feels like a lot, but as we saw today, different people own more of different pieces of it, if that makes sense. So everybody in the room today was kind of interested in everything, but then some were more interested in some things than other things because, that's their wheelhouse. That's where they spend their day all day. I never saw anyone feel uncomfortable about, I work, in PR, but I've got a student outcome thought, or I got a question, or I work in finance, but I want to ask something about staff. I never saw any hesitancy, and I think that's really great. I think that you have a greater chance of it being less siloed, less barriers, senior leaders kind of working against each other, because I saw a lot of harmony today. Now, I saw a couple of times that it's like, I'm out of my lane, it's yours. I asked my question and I'm getting out. But seriously, as long as they can say that, that's the whole point. Okay, was everybody fair enough on, I don't want to beat the scorecard to death. I don't want y'all to change your mind about using it just because we're talking about it tonight. But
No,
any thoughts about the scorecard? Yes, ma'am.
no, I just wanted to, and no, I don't completely completely understand all these numbers just yet, but these already with our goals that are set through our
Yes.
House Bill 3. And
They're
so
integrated
it just
into
marries
that.
the two.
Yes,
And exceeds what the requirement is.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
it's a great question, and we purposefully spent some time thinking that you might ask that tonight or any other trustee, and we wanted, no, it came up organically, and so we said, no, they just need to integrate in. So we made sure, and we made, I don't know, that was a 15 or 20-minute conversation to do some of the nuances on this to make sure that that was built into this.
Perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, Mr. President, again, there's more material in your packet than you need. One quick, I should have organized the packet better. Claudia did a really good job, but it's back, it's about 7 pages from the end of the.
Just show us the page.
Yeah, I can't, let me get up. Couldn't pull it up.
You can just show it to us.
For good governance.
Is it this one right here?
I'd have, is this one Diane?
Oh, yeah.
So one of the, so there's like 3 big buckets tonight, and that was one of them. So this primer, and then Dr. Carmen, I have a second primer that I'll talk about a little bit that I'll send, and I think sending both of those to the board, and it actually might have been better just for us to talk about it, and then y'all just get this and think about it later. But if you remember, when we were talking initially, and you have a model in your packet on the strategic role, the tactical role, and the operational role. So it's like those 3 roles, and the board is the strategic role. So like you're this big picture, you're not getting the work done, but you're listening to the community and you're saying this is the work that the tactical team needs to get done. And that's what this whole process does. Now then the tactical team goes and tries to sell it and build capacity all the way to the front line. Y'all remember the 3 custodians? One of them said, I'm clearing up after these slobs. The other one said, I'm trying to help the engineers. And the other one said, I'm putting a man on the moon. Like that's the work of the next 24 months once this is adopted. Can that frontline staff member see, oh, I'm part of that? Like I work on this stuff because I'm part of moving that goal. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. So one of the hardest things, and it was interesting, TRS, Texas Teacher Retirement System, opened up a branch here in El Paso today. I don't know if y'all know that. It's really kind of cool. And Dr. Duran said, you used to be on the TRS board. Why don't you go to the grand opening? Just get an earlier flight. That would be really cool. And I thank her because we literally walked in like right as it was starting, and they went, and here's Dr. Gibson. He was on the TRS board when this was adopted, and so my glasses are transitions, and they were still, like I look like Roy Orbison is my point. In the pit. Like that's how fast she just whisked me in the room, and then I'm getting it. But it was really cool. And so I can't remember if I told you or not, but I was on the board at TRS. So I was a superintendent, but then I would drive to Austin, and boom, I was a board member. And it was just so hard for me to like get out of my superintendent brain and then, be a board member. And like literally in an hour, I had to be a board member. And I started like really obsessing about, I need to be the best board member. I don't need to go in there and I didn't run for the board to be a superintendent, and they already have an executive director. I'm supposed to be one of 9 board members. So I started really just thinking about how do you do this? So a lot of this material, this primer on being a board member is how do you stay in that strategic role while your team is giving you, Dr. Carmen's team is giving a tactical report. So like we've given a tactical report and we're almost like inviting you down into the weeds, right? But then we're saying, but don't go in the weeds, you know, okay, oh, sorry. So I'm just telling you, like, that's going to be the thing that you all are going to like really be working on in the coming months, because here's a tactical report. So this is designed to give you some best practices. And by the way, many of the front end of this, like, you're already doing all these best practices. You're working on belief, mission, vision. We're going to talk about team trust later tonight. Then there are some examples here of why board members may leave the strategic role. This is based loosely on some of my work as I was trying to become a better board member. And then Michael Fullen and Campbell. Fullen and Campbell's the governance core. So, you know, it's tempting to take what you know from your own work experience and assume it will apply to the district. What's number 2 on this checklist for why individuals may leave the strategic role? You know, this board thing is indirect leadership. So that's a real complex, like, I have to get what I want done as a board member through the superintendent. So when I was on the TRS board, whether I liked it or not, I could have the greatest, what I perceived to be the greatest idea on earth. If the executive director didn't think it was worthy of a follow-up meeting, it wasn't going to happen. And that was kind of hard for me to, you know, come to grips with that. But it's like, you know, so I'm almost like I have to kind of sell the, you know, the CEO of the organization. Let me give a concrete example of that. One of our trustees in Shirts really got this concept, and he said, okay, we're all about to go to the TASB conference, and all 7 of us are going to 7 different meetings. So that's 49 different presentations that we're going and getting a handout. And so then we're going to walk to the superintendent and we're going to drop 49 presentations on his desk and say, oh, this is what I attended. You ought to look into it. And then, yeah, the superintendent's going to go, where do I even start? That's the way I felt. And so this was our board vice president at Shirts, Scott Harrod, and he said, so he actually created a forum for other board members that, and by the way, you've got to get your required training. So he wasn't saying don't go to the training, but he had this little checklist. What part of the scorecard does this presentation align to? It's pretty smart. So like that was like, you know, he had like a 5-question checklist that before you could hand it to the superintendent, and that was like question number 1. Question number 2 was, does this add value to an existing action or replace an existing action? See, that's really important. Like, am I trying to say this is a value add to something I already hear we're doing? Or am I, and truthfully, I don't even remember what question 3, 4, and 5 was, because if you made it past those 2 hurdles, I was just taking them, you know, like, but does that make sense? And so like we went from 49 things pitched to the superintendent to a couple every year. And 1 or 2 of them came from Mr. Harrod because he made the checklist. He didn't mind fulfilling the checklist. But I got to tell you, it made sense to me. And at first I thought, oh, Mr. Harrod, that's too restrictive. I mean, here I am, you know, telling him to not restrict the board to hand all this to me on one voice. And then in my head, I'm going, okay, that's a really good idea because I never know what to do with this stack of stuff this tall. So anyway, that's just a good example of how you start thinking strategically. You're overseeing the scorecard. You're interested in the scorecard. You're ensuring that all of the district's resources, or not all, but the majority of them are lined up to the scorecard. But, you know, how do I do it and not get in the weeds, you know, too much like that? So the other document that I wanted to send Dr. Carmen, and I don't think it's in here, are actually the questions that the board, and I know that there's 20 signs here, but it's, and we'll do this later, but when the board starts hearing scorecard reports, we have 26 good questions that board members can ask. And so here's an example. So don't ask, why is it painted red? Ask, what is our process for determining paint color? You see how that you can get to the same place, but you're asking it in a very strategic way versus a very tactical way. And so we have these like literally 26 questions, like board members can, and it may be in here, but I think I failed to get it to Dr. Carmen, but we don't need to look at it tonight. But does that make sense about like thinking about framing questions? And truthfully, I realized that at TRS, I was making too many statements and asking too few questions when I was a board member. I realized I should be asking questions. And I need to be thinking about how I'm framing them. Okay, fair enough. Like that's kind of the little sales pitch for that, and you've got a primer coming to help you with that. I'm gonna pause for a second. Everybody good? Mm-hmm. Okay. So then there's a separate document, and I know we're like going through the paper shuffle here, but this document I set out, we just finished getting all this calculated, but if you all remember, I think Dr. Gilcrease and I sat over here that very first night, and I said, this is not very smart, but we're going to give y'all a test on the first night. Well, here are the results of the test. So if you look like 1.1, so good governance indicator 1 is the board has formally adopted belief statements, mission, and vision. So then we have 3 supporting components of that, if you will. So we have collectively developed and formally adopted belief, mission, and vision statements. So if you look in the response box there, 1 of you said yes, 6 of you said no, and none of you said I don't know. Okay, so we color code that orange, if you look at the top, because the majority of the responses are in no and or I don't know. Does that make sense? And so if you have the majority of the responses in yes, we color it yellow. And then if you have all of the responses in yes, we color it green. So it's like the board scorecard. And so think of it this way: district scorecard that you're overseeing, board scorecard that you're working on as a board. I'm gonna be real concrete here. This is your work. This is his work that you're overseeing. And if you're going to ask Dr. Carmen to lead in a continuous improvement manner where they're constantly analyzing data and asking how can we do it better, the best way for you to model that in the board is to say we've set some goals based on a good governance self-analysis and we're not stopping until it's all green. Now so you look on here and you may be thinking, man, that's a lot of orange. This is not an uncommon profile. So I want you to look at 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3, and I want you to fast forward to the next time you take it, let's say next March, and you have just adopted this. What happens to your responses for 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3? Everybody see what I'm saying? Yep. So you just went green. And so, because now we have anchored to belief, mission, and vision. Now we're reviewing it. So you take 1.1, and truthfully, if you want to look at it this way, 2.1. Look at 2, same. So if you get this done right in the next 3 or 4 months, you address 1 and 2. Does that make sense? So I want you to feel good about that. Like that gets you some momentum going. Now I'll go ahead and tell you 3, 4, 5, and 6 are different. And so it's being clarity about board operating guidelines, being clarity about budget development, being clear about or developing clarity around what we mean when we say advocacy. Does advocacy only mean that we're going to state meetings, or does advocacy meaning we're all on the same page and we're telling the same story? We're telling Socorro ISD's story, and there's a roadmap for all the rest of these. Mr. President and trustees, I think the best thing you can do, and it may not need to be every month, but every other month or at least once a quarter, you guys are putting this on that screen or you're taking it again. And by the way, I strongly believe in this. When we take it the second time after the adoption of this, we leave these colors on here and we put the new ones in the second column. And then we put the next one in the next column. So you're watching a 3-time trend line. And, you know, I just believe strongly that you'll move a lot of orange to yellow and yellow to green, or even orange to green once we take this step. And it's not just like, here's an arbitrary thing. I mean, we laid out every form of good governance indicators that we could find, and just felt like these 18 indicators were fair enough statements with TASB and 10 others, Full and Campbell, TASB, AA, SA. I mean, just we laid out a bunch of them, and like these were the indicators. All right, so I'm gonna pause there because that's a little different way to think about things, but does that make sense? Somebody, do you see something in this that shocks you, or does it look about right? Anybody want to argue with me on the results? If you do, I'm just going to pull out what you checked on your boxes right out of the folder right here, because that's all we did. Any comments? Mr. President, do you think, I saw you nod your head and I appreciate it, like setting a date, we don't have to do it right now, but 6 months from now, what are you thinking right now? So like if this is adopted, I think at some point you ought to retake the good governance, because you've addressed a lot of the really important pieces of it. So what are your thoughts?
I think 6 months is too long, actually.
Okay, perfect.
I think maybe 3 months.
Okay, so like look early in the spring. I like that actually, which is probably close to 6 months from the first time you took it, because that was probably a couple of months ago, yeah. So fair enough. Then I think, okay, then we plot that. Thank you, sir, for saying that. Then we plot that. Then we decide if we want to take it again in 6 months. There's some point I know it can go to annual. You all just have to say, okay, we've got enough progress going now that like now it can be an annual assessment. And then what I would love for y'all to do, I'm kind of throwing down the competition gauntlet here, be the first district that goes all green. Because we've got some that are out a few months ahead of you, and so we're working like, how much do we need to do to get that all green? And then all we're going to do is make the questions harder. I mean, but that's 2.0. That's good governance inventory 2.0. And truthfully, there's about 15 more questions, and Buck and I decided to take them out because we just started thinking about, like, you're peeling back layers of the onion. This is the first layer. And then you can go a little deeper, a little more granular once you understand this first layer. So thank you, Mr. President. I think February, March-ish, somewhere in there.
I think February is probably perfect. The sooner the better. We need to start getting greener.
Yep, I love it. Thank you for that. Any other thoughts, anyone?
Super intentional on your part. And if you look at that last column at the far right of your page, follow-up actions to get the desired outcome, there may have to be some, decisions made by this board. What actions are we going to take because we're struggling to get to green on one of these items? So what are we going to do intentionally to make sure we get there? So that's for you all to also look at. Just as the leadership team has action items to work on their goals, these are your action items to get to your desired outcomes as well.
So really good. Thank you for closing that loop, Dr. Drummond. The far right column in this is their key strategic actions.
Yeah, that's right.
Is basically, so the column 3 up here, like this is the board. And I don't think you need to spend a lot of time on 1 and 2 right now, seriously, because that's being addressed with the scorecard. So just so that, I know that this is volunteer position, so you don't have all the time in the world. I would focus conversation, Dr. Duran, to your point, on 3, 4, 5, and 6. And so like read those, set aside some time to say, okay, and so like if you look at 3, someone's going to say, okay, get out the board operating guidelines, and we need to consider the strategic, tactical, and operational role as part of our board operating guidelines. So what the board's basically doing is they're committing to stay in the strategic role as part of board operating guidelines. Then 3.3, how we're data driven. How we had 5 that said yes, So, it's a fair question to say, okay, how do we demonstrate better to be more data-driven? Now, the scorecard might do it for this one also, or 3.3. Does that make sense? Like, once we start looking at the data like this and understanding what Dr. Carmen and the team are doing, then now all 7 of us are saying, okay, we're data-driven. They give us these progress measure updates, and I get more data than I ever thought I would know about Socorro ISD, and, we're data-driven. I'm part of the data-driven team. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, the fourth column, the follow-up action to get to desired outcomes. Do we address that, like, after our first progress measure? Because to me, it just makes sense to ask those questions when we see the results from our first progress measure as a board, to have a discussion, okay, what do we need to do to reach this? Does that make sense?
Well, I do think going through a couple, you're talking about this scorecard report?
No, I'm talking about this one.
Right, but are you saying we need to hear a couple of those reports before we come back and work on this?
no.
Okay, all right,
No,
sorry, I
I'm just-
misheard you.
Whenever the board completes our first progress measure and we get these
Oh,
results.
I gotcha.
And, if we're not green, and then do we, at that time, have
Yes.
that conversation? of
Yes,
What
that's-
follow-up actions do we need to do?
That makes total sense to me. Adopt this, take it again, and then see where it is, and then go to work on follow-up actions. That's what you're saying, and I think that is a very, very astute way to look at it.
And is that generally done in a board workshop?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you'll adopt this at a regular meeting, then you can just take it again at the end of another meeting. And then now you've got the results. So we've adopted this, we took it again, we've got our second column filled in, now let's go to work. What are our follow-up actions?
Where we still have orange and yellow.
That's right. And truthfully, celebrate, something went green, let's take a moment to just pause that, okay, that makes it, let's don't ever let that not be green anymore. We talked about today, if you get a number to 92, and that truthfully, that's about as high as it can go, then hold 92 while we work on other stuff, right? Like, don't let that slip while we take a look at other stuff. It's similar to that. I love that timeline, and yeah, Dr. Carmen, a workshop after that second administration would be great. Okay. I said 45 minutes for the first half of this, and we have hit 45 minutes, so I think we're on track. Mr. President,
I have a question
yes,
for
sir,
you.
absolutely.
How hard is it for a board to go all green? With your expertise doing this year after year, with this being mostly all orange, how hard is it to go all green? Or is that an impossible task?
No, I think in 2 or 3 years of doing it the way we just talked about, you'll be through with this inventory. Like, you will have hit these. If you stay on it and you keep looking at it and you keep talking about it and you're modeling continuous improvement, really the answer to that is the frequency with which you all are willing to have a discussion about it. That's how quickly you can get it green. And I mean, Mr. President, you sent my mind in 1,000 different directions at one time, but you all may or may not be having as much board turnover as some places. What I think is wonderful about this kind of work is that new trustees are coming in and they're in the middle of this continuous improvement. So yeah, they have a voice. Sure, we want to be unified, but we don't have to be uniform. But this is part of the being unified. We're working on this stuff. And hey, congratulations, you just got sworn in and you're part of the team that's working on this. And then he or she says, well, I don't even know what that means. Okay, then you're an I don't know. We've got to get you to a yes. So, and that's fair. Now I just don't want you to be an I don't know. So I'm going to help you understand when that's asked, that's when we're doing this report. And so now it's not just the superintendent with one quick orientation, which there's nothing wrong with that. You got to do it by law. But it's really trying to dig in a little bit better. All the trustees don't want the new trustee to not know what some of this means. That's a good question, and I would love for you all to green this thing out in 24 months.
At least some green.
Yeah, but again, it's the frequency of your follow-up work on it. But so you're asking the district, you're asking the superintendent to develop a scorecard that's kind of doing the same thing. How quickly can we get, this, number from an 80 to a 88 to a 92? That's what we were talking about all day today. Like, what's the right trajectory for this number? Okay, any other questions? Do you have anything? Are we good?
No, I just a comment, I would say that what you see in terms of your color coding here is, and you said it, Greg, it's not really uncommon with other boards when they first take this. This is more of an awareness for you all. These are not typical questions that boards are asking themselves, but this is a starting place for where we are today. But again, intentionality with how we want to move forward with the scorecard and with the implementation of the scorecard, moving from orange to these other colors. So this is not uncommon, but it's got to be an intentional effort by 7 board members and the superintendent working together.
It has to be all 7 of us? What if we're missing
Well,
one
the
or
green,
2?
all yes respondents is
It's 7.
green.
So all of us have to be present. Okay.
Well, and that, ideally, yes. No, put an asterisk on that. I don't think you can, and, well, we're here tonight. We can't wait to get started.
That's right.
So I see a commitment tonight, like we're starting the work, but then try to get, because then arguably it's an I don't know, and we're trying to get everybody to yes, and then it's an I don't know. So fair point and good observation. And then in your packet is a blank good governance inventory, just to point out, whenever you're ready to take it again, you have it. Like you've got it. And we, Dr. Carmen, and you and I can keep talking about like the timing of that, but Ms. Harris, I think that's a really good thought of get this adopted, have a first discussion about it, then reassess, then let's see where we are.
It's like Dr. Carmen's going to have conversations with his cabinet of how do we achieve that,
Yeah.
their progress measures. The board needs to have a conversation at the same, how are we going to achieve our
Yep.
progress measures?
That's right. And I mean, I don't mind telling you all, I have served on the committee of superintendents that picks board of the year, and I'm not telling you that's why you need to do this. But I can tell you this. If that group walked in and said, okay, here's our trajectory on how we're trying to be a better board, and I love a good story, don't get me wrong, but I like a story with some data along with the story. And so now you're coming in to tell the Socorro board story, but then you're saying, look at our journey. Look at all that orange. Look how we got it to yellow. Look how we got it to green. And just saying, my mom told me, got to let your light shine, son, if you do something right. So all to say, like, you would be a good role model for boards. And that's the purpose of that TASB Board of the Year, is to be a good role model, right? I mean, that's the whole point. You would be setting a really good tone for the state of Texas. Mr. President, at the initial meeting, we took a team trust self-analysis, and I actually have the results of that, and it is eligible to debrief in executive session under the component of 551074 personnel, because the attorneys we've consulted with numerous, they know that it's a part of the board being able to speak freely with each other. It was clear to us by the attorneys that the good governance, everything we just did, has to be in public forum. That was great. We just did that. But again, the next part is eligible for executive session.
Okay. So at this time, we will go into executive session. This meeting is to be closed for public hearing presentation, the team trust debrief components of the strategic planning process under the Texas Code, Section 551-071.
We don't have executive on
Executive
the,
session's not on our agenda.
There's
Does
a
it matter?
line item at the bottom that says if at any point during the meeting.
I missed that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't have my glasses on for that.
Well, no, it's very small. Yeah, it's very, thank you for noticing, but
Thank you, Cindy. We want to make sure everything's in compliance. And under the Texas Government Code, Section 551071, the time is 6:23. Good evening. We're back from executive session. The time is 7:25. At this time, I will adjourn the meeting. If there's any questions at this time? If not, meeting adjourned. The time is 7:26. Have a good evening.